You're talking too much, Wendy. I do not want you to go to jail. And I'm begging you to stop talking. I'm begging you to stop interviewing. I'm begging you because I don't believe it's helping you. Take it from the Karen you used to like. How about that? Because when you talk, they watch. Okay, they hear you. And so I would have said, respectfully, Andy, I can't answer those questions right now.
The footage starts grainy, almost harmless at first glance. A red carpet clip, flashes of cameras, Wendy Osefo smiling for the press, while everything around her looks perfectly controlled. But then the narration cuts in, and suddenly the entire moment feels different. Rewatched, reinterpreted, like something hidden was always sitting just beneath the surface. Because now, months later, that same smile is being questioned. That same polished image is being pulled apart frame by frame. And what's emerging isn't just another reality TV controversy. It's a full-blown unraveling that nobody in the Bravo universe saw coming this fast. It all begins with whispers, then headlines. Then suddenly, a flood of online detectives connecting dots that were never meant to be connected in public. Reports of financial strain, questions about business decisions, rumors of inconsistencies in statements that once seemed harmless. And now, the biggest shock of all, talk that Wendy and her husband Eddie Osefo may not just be dealing with personal tension, but a complete legal and emotional collapse happening behind closed doors. But here's where it gets even more intense, because just when fans thought they understood the situation, new footage allegedly resurfaced. Clips that people are now saying don't match the story that was originally presented. Small details, offhand comments. Moments that were brushed off at the time, but now feel like pieces of a much bigger puzzle. And the internet is doing what it does best, replaying everything. Why did certain explanations change over time? Why are old interviews suddenly being viewed under a different light? And why are insiders now suggesting that what looked like a simple misunderstanding may have actually been something far more complicated unfolding in real time? Then comes the twist nobody expected, reports of a growing split inside the Osefo household. Not just emotional distance, but strategic separation, legal positioning, damage control. And suddenly, the word divorce starts circulating everywhere, not as a rumor anymore, but as a possible turning point in the entire saga. But the most explosive part? Allegations that one side of the story may be shifting blame entirely onto the other. And if that's true, then everything fans thought they understood about loyalty, partnership, and what really happened behind the scenes could be completely wrong. And just when it feels like the situation can't escalate any further, new claims surface suggesting investigators are still piecing together financial records, past decisions, and contradictions that don't line up with the public narrative. At this point, it's no longer just about reality TV. It's about trust. It's about survival. And it's about what really happens when the cameras stop rolling. But the consequences don't. The story doesn't start with chaos. It starts with control. Wendy Osefo built her public identity on structure, intelligence, and composure. She wasn't the typical reality TV personality who stumbled into fame through scandal or drama. She arrived with credentials, confidence, and a carefully curated sense of authority that instantly set her apart in the world of the Real Housewives of Potomac. A political commentator, academic, author, and media personality, she represented something different. Someone who could argue, explain, and dissect while still standing firmly in designer heels under studio lights. That's exactly why her name carried weight. She wasn't just reacting in conversations, she was framing them. She wasn't just part of the cast. She often felt like she was analyzing it from above it. But that image, as polished as it appeared on screen, didn't exist in isolation. Behind it was a life built on ambition, partnerships, financial pressure, and the constant balancing act that comes with public visibility. Wendy's marriage to Eddie Osefo was often presented as stable, supportive, and aligned with her upward trajectory. He wasn't just her husband in the public eye. He was positioned as part of her foundation, the person behind the scenes who helped maintain the lifestyle that matched her growing brand. And for a while, that story worked. As Wendy's profile rose, so did expectations. Television exposure brings opportunity, but it also brings pressure to sustain a certain image. Luxury homes, fashion statements, public appearances, brand partnerships. All of it becomes part of the narrative whether it reflects reality or not. And once that narrative takes hold, it doesn't just represent who you are. It becomes what people expect you to keep proving. That's where things start to get complicated. In reality TV ecosystems, perception often becomes currency. Every cast member is not only living their life, but also performing a version of it that can survive editing rooms, social media scrutiny, and fan interpretation. Wendy understood this better than most. Her academic background gave her a unique advantage in verbal confrontations, but it also made her highly aware of how narratives are constructed and controlled. Still, control is fragile when multiple pressures begin stacking at the same time. Over the seasons, viewers saw glimpses of tension. Not always dramatic, but subtle enough to notice if you were paying attention. Conversations about work-life balance, shifts in priorities, discussions around business ventures, family responsibilities, and the cost of maintaining a lifestyle that matched public expectations. None of it, at the time, pointed directly to collapse. But in hindsight, those moments are now being revisited with a different lens. Because when a public story changes, people go back to the beginning. Wendy Osefo's role in the household narrative also became part of that evolving perception. As Wendy expanded her media presence, questions naturally followed about how the family's finances and structure adapted. In the world of public figures, especially reality stars, viewers tend to speculate about how much of the lifestyle is self-sustained versus strategically supported. And while neither Wendy nor Eddie publicly invited those conversations, they became unavoidable as the spotlight intensified. At the same time, Wendy's professional identity kept growing. Appearances on news panels, academic commentary, book discussions, and televised debates all reinforced the idea that she was operating on multiple levels simultaneously. That kind of visibility creates admiration, but it also increases scrutiny. Every contradiction, every change in tone, every shift in narrative becomes amplified. And that amplification is where reality TV turns into something else entirely. Because audiences don't just watch anymore, investigate. Social media platforms began to act like open-source archives. Old clips resurfaced. Interviews were reanalyzed. Statements made in passing were compared across seasons. Fans started building timelines, connecting dots between financial discussions, personal remarks, and offhand comments that once seemed insignificant. The internet doesn't forget, it reorganizes. And as those narratives were rebuilt, the perception of Wendy's world started to shift. What once looked like a stable, high-functioning partnership began to be reinterpreted through a more critical lens. Not because of one single event, but because of accumulated curiosity. People started asking whether the image presented on screen fully matched what was happening behind it, whether certain struggles had been minimized, whether certain decisions had been fully explained. At the same time, the broader context of reality television added fuel to the speculation. Viewers are conditioned to expect reveals, twists, and hidden truths. So when anything feels slightly inconsistent, it doesn't stay neutral. It becomes suspicious. And that's how background becomes buildup. Behind the scenes, there were also growing mentions of financial pressure and shifting responsibilities. In public life, those details are rarely spelled out directly. Instead, they appear in fragments, comments about workload, changes in business focus, or subtle references to stress. Individually, they don't mean much. Together, they start forming a pattern that audiences can't ignore. Meanwhile, Wendy's public persona remained composed. Even as speculation increased online, her on-screen presence continued to reflect control and clarity. That contrast between external confidence and internal questioning is often what draws the most attention in long-running reality TV arcs. Because viewers begin to wonder which version reflects reality more accurately. And that question is what sets the stage for everything that follows. Because once audiences start believing there's a gap between what is shown and what is real, every new development gets interpreted through that suspicion. Every interaction becomes evidence. Every change becomes a clue. Without a single confirmed scandal at this point, the narrative still begins to shift, from admiration to analysis, from support to scrutiny, and from a personal story about success and partnership into something more unstable, where every detail feels like it could matter later. That's the foundation the current situation is built on. Not a single moment of collapse, but a long, slow accumulation of attention, interpretation, and re-examination. And once that process starts in the public eye, it rarely moves backward. By the time the first real twist hits, the conversation around Wendy Osefo is no longer casual reality TV chatter. It has shifted into something sharper, more investigative, almost like a courtroom narrative unfolding in real time across social media timelines. What used to be entertainment now feels like evidence being examined piece by piece. And that's when the first major rupture appears. At first, it's not framed as a scandal. It's framed as a discrepancy. A detail here, a timeline mismatch there, a comment that doesn't quite align with an earlier statement. Fans begin pointing out that certain explanations around financial decisions and household structure seem to evolve depending on the setting. Interviews, confessionals, public appearances. Nothing is outright confirmed as wrongdoing at this stage, but the consistency people once assumed is now being questioned. Then the speculation escalates. Online discussions start focusing on lifestyle versus reality. The luxury image that has always surrounded Wendy and Eddie Osefo becomes part of the analysis. Viewers begin asking how certain expenses are sustained, how certain investments are managed, and why certain explanations about income streams feel vague or inconsistent when revisited. It is in this environment that the first serious allegation surfaces. A claim emerges online suggesting that a staged incident may have been misrepresented for financial gain. The details are fragmented at first, shared through commentary accounts, reposted clips, and anonymous threads. But the idea spreads quickly that what was initially described publicly as a straightforward event might not have been as simple as it appeared. That's the spark. Once that idea enters the conversation, everything else gets reinterpreted through it. Old footage is pulled back into circulation. A clip of Wendy discussing property and possessions is recirculated with new captions suggesting contradictions. Another interview is reframed as foreshadowing. Even harmless statements about insurance, security, or household responsibilities are re-edited into suspicious context by online creators trying to piece together a larger narrative. And suddenly, what was once background noise becomes evidence. The most talked about moment in this phase is a resurfaced discussion involving missing or disputed items and financial claims. In isolation, it was a standard reality TV storyline, something that would normally be resolved within an episode arc. But now, it is being treated as a potential entry point into something much larger. The internet does what it always does in situations like this. It connects dots aggressively. Screenshots are compiled, episode clips are slowed down, quotes are transcribed and compared. People begin building timelines that suggest inconsistencies between what was said publicly and what may have been happening privately. Whether these interpretations are accurate or not becomes secondary to how compelling they are. And that's where the conflict deepens. Because now it's not just about perception, it's about trust. Within the storyline being constructed online, Eddie Osefo's role shifts from supportive partner to questioned participant. Posts begin circulating suggesting that financial decisions within the household may not have been as transparent as previously believed. Some users argue that Eddie was more involved in certain dealings than Wendy has acknowledged on screen. Others push the opposite theory, that Wendy was fully aware and actively involved in every decision. Two competing narratives form almost simultaneously. One paints Wendy as a public-facing figure, caught in a complicated private situation she didn't fully control. The other paints her as a calculated participant managing both image and outcomes. Neither is confirmed. Both gain traction, and once that split forms, the story becomes impossible to contain. The first real twist lands when attention shifts from general speculation to legal implications being discussed online. Reports and rumors begin circulating about possible investigations into financial inconsistencies, documentation questions, and discrepancies in reported events. Nothing is officially verified in the public space, but the language used online becomes increasingly serious. Words like fraud, misrepresentation, and records review begin appearing in comment sections and discussion threads. This is where the tone of the entire narrative changes. Reality TV drama becomes something closer to a legal thriller. At the same time, Wendy's public responses, or lack of direct engagement with specific rumors, become part of the story itself. Every interview clip is now analyzed not just for what is said, but for what is avoided. Silence is interpreted, neutral statements are dissected. Even general commentary about privacy or family begins to take on new meaning in the eyes of viewers looking for hidden signals. The pressure intensifies further when social media begins revisiting Wendy's earlier confident positioning of her personal brand. Clips of her asserting control, intelligence, and authority are now being juxtaposed with allegations of inconsistency. That contrast fuels the perception that something deeper is unfolding beneath the surface. Then comes the most destabilizing development of this phase. the suggestion of internal separation, not just emotional distance, but structural division within the household narrative. Online speculation begins to suggest that Wendy and Eddie may be repositioning themselves independently in response to external pressure. The idea of divorce enters the conversation not as a rumor, but as a strategic possibility. And that single idea changes everything. Because once separation becomes part of the discussion, every previous action is reinterpreted. Financial decisions are no longer viewed as joint strategy. They become potential points of conflict. Public appearances are no longer just branding. They become performance under strain. Even past interviews are reframed as evidence of cracks that were always there. At this stage, nothing is confirmed, but perception has already moved ahead of facts, and that gap is where the tension lives. Behind the scenes, the narrative being constructed online grows more complex. Some users insist that the entire situation is being exaggerated and distorted by internet speculation. Others argue that too many small inconsistencies exist to ignore. The community splits into defenders and skeptics, each side reinforcing their own interpretation with selective evidence. Meanwhile, commentary channels amplify every development, turning fragmented details into serialized storytelling. Each new post adds another layer, another possibility, another theory. And Wendy, at the center of it all, becomes less of a person in the narrative and more of a symbol, of success under pressure, of public image under scrutiny, of private life being reconstructed in public space. The major conflict is no longer a single allegation. It is the collapse of narrative certainty. What people thought they understood about Wendy Osefo's life is no longer stable. Every detail is now conditional. Every explanation is temporary. Every memory is open to reinterpretation. And that instability is what drives the story forward. Because once the audience believes the truth might be layered rather than linear, they stop watching for resolution and start watching for exposure. And that is exactly where the next phase begins, with escalation that no one can fully control anymore. Once the narrative breaks out of speculation and into escalation, everything around Wendy Osefo starts moving faster than she can realistically respond to. What was once a controlled public image now feels like it's being pulled in multiple directions at once, by social media, by commentary channels, by resurfaced clips, and by a growing wave of insider claims that may or may not be verified, but are being treated as if they are. And that's where things take a sharper turn. Because now it's no longer just about inconsistency or perception gaps. It's about alleged patterns. Online discussions begin to shift from what happened to how long has this been happening. That single change in framing is what transforms everything. Instead of isolated incidents, people start building a connected storyline. The one where financial strain, public image management, and private decision-making are all part of a much larger structure. And in that structure, Wendy is no longer just a cast member. She becomes the central node of a developing controversy. The escalation begins with renewed attention on financial behavior. Not new evidence in a legal sense, but reinterpretations of previously known information. Clips from past seasons are resurfaced where discussions around money, property, and lifestyle choices were mentioned casually. At the time, they were treated as standard reality TV conversations. Now they are being analyzed like testimony. Viewers start asking why certain explanations about household stability seem to shift over time. Why some discussions were framed confidently in one season, then softened or redirected in another. And whether those shifts were natural evolution or strategic adjustment. Then comes the wave that changes the tone entirely. Amplified allegations circulating online that suggest financial misrepresentation tied to staged or exaggerated circumstances. These claims spread quickly through reposted threads, reaction videos, and commentary breakdowns. Even though they remain unverified in the public domain, their repetition gives them weight in the digital ecosystem. And once repetition replaces verification, perception starts to harden. The shocking part is not just what is being said, but how widely it is being discussed as if it were already established fact. At the same time, attention turns toward Eddie Osefo's role with increasing intensity. What began as curiosity about a spouse's involvement evolves into a full parallel narrative. Some online voices suggest that Eddie may have had deeper operational control over certain financial decisions than previously understood. Others argue the opposite, that Wendy's public brand may have been more financially central than portrayed. This division creates a dual storyline. In one version, Wendy is a public figure navigating consequences of decisions made within a complex household system. In the other, she is an active architect of both image and financial structure, fully aware of the risks and outcomes. Neither version is confirmed, but both are now circulating widely enough to shape how every new detail is interpreted. Then comes the moment that pushes the situation from escalation into shock. A resurfaced compilation begins circulating online. Multiple clips stitched together from different interviews and episodes where Wendy discusses control, independence, and financial confidence. The editing is intentional, designed to highlight contrasts between statements made at different times. In one clip, she emphasizes structure and oversight. In another, she emphasizes delegation and trust. In another, she frames financial responsibility as shared but flexible. Individually, none of these statements are unusual. Combined, they are being used to suggest inconsistency. And that is what triggers the next wave. Because now, viewers are no longer just analyzing events, they are analyzing credibility. At this stage, commentary channels begin presenting theories that go beyond surface-level speculation. Some suggest that the household narrative may have been strategically curated for television. Others argue that reality TV exposure may have amplified existing private stress into something more visible and chaotic than it originally was. The truth becomes less important than the structure of the theory itself. Then, the most explosive development in this phase emerges. Renewed discussion of legal scrutiny, tied to financial documentation and insurance-related claims that had previously circulated in fragmented form. While no definitive public ruling is confirmed within the narrative being discussed online, the language around these claims becomes increasingly formal in tone. People are no longer just saying rumors, they are saying cases, investigations, and paper trails. This shift in vocabulary is crucial, because once language changes, perception follows. Suddenly, what was once framed as reality TV drama is being discussed in the same breath as legal consequence. And that elevates the entire situation into a different category of public interest. Wendy's public presence during this period becomes even more heavily scrutinized. Every appearance is dissected for emotional cues. Every statement is examined for indirect acknowledgement. Even neutral commentary about personal growth or resilience is reframed as potential response to off-screen pressure. But the most shocking part of the escalation is not what is confirmed. It's how quickly uncertainty turns into assumed narrative. Social media begins operating as a collective investigator. Users compile timelines, map relationships, and construct chronological breakdowns of events that may or may not be connected. Each new post adds another layer to a growing structure that feels coherent, even if its foundation is partially speculative. And once a narrative feels coherent, it becomes self-sustaining. At the same time, internal household dynamics, at least as perceived publicly, begin to fracture further in interpretation. The idea of separation, once speculative, becomes a recurring theme across discussions. Some argue it represents a strategic legal and financial repositioning. Others see it as emotional collapse under public pressure. And this is where the shocking reveal begins to take shape. Because now, the conversation is no longer just about whether a divorce is happening. It is about why it would happen, what it would mean, and how it would reframe everything that came before. The possibility of divorce becomes a narrative anchor that retroactively redefines past behavior. Actions that once seemed collaborative are now interpreted as pre-separation negotiations. Statements that once sounded unified are now viewed as carefully managed public messaging. Even silence becomes significant. And in that environment, every piece of content becomes loaded. Old interviews are re-uploaded with new captions. Past arguments from the show are reframed as early warning signs. Even lighthearted moments are reinterpreted as masking tension. The escalation reaches its peak when online discussion converges on a single idea, that the public version of Wendy and Eddie's relationship may have been fundamentally different from the private reality for some time. Not necessarily better or worse, just different. And that distinction is what unsettles audiences most. Because it suggests that what they were watching was not the full picture, but a controlled version of it. And once that possibility takes hold, it becomes very difficult to reverse. At the end of this phase, nothing is conclusively proven, but everything feels unstable. The narrative has expanded beyond any single claim or moment. It now exists as a network of interpretations, allegations, and reframed memories. And at the center of it all is a simple but powerful shift. Wendy Osefo is no longer just being watched. She is being reconstructed in real time. Once the situation reaches the public reaction stage, it stops being a contained storyline and becomes a full-scale media event. The difference isn't just volume, it's interpretation. Everyone now has an opinion, and more importantly, everyone believes their version is the correct one. The internet doesn't just react anymore. It organizes. On one side, there are viewers who refuse to believe the narrative being built online. They argue that reality TV has trained audiences to exaggerate normal life tensions into scandals. To them, Wendy Osefo is being pulled into a familiar cycle where editing, selective clips, and online speculation combine to create a version of events that feels bigger than what actually exists. These voices emphasize her academic background, her professionalism, and her long-standing ability to handle public pressure without breaking character. They point out something important. Nothing has been officially confirmed in the way social media is presenting it. No verified legal outcome, no direct admission, no clear documentation made public in the narrative space the internet is discussing. For this group, the entire situation is a reminder of how quickly perception can detach from reality. But on the other side, skepticism has already hardened into belief. This group sees too many coincidences to ignore. They revisit old clips with a forensic mindset, slowing down interviews, comparing statements, and building timelines that suggest inconsistency. To them, this is not random noise. It is pattern recognition. They argue that where there is smoke, there is at least some form of fire, even if the full picture isn't visible yet. And that division creates something powerful, a culture war around interpretation. Entertainment commentators step in and amplify it further. YouTube analysts break down Wendy's past appearances frame by frame. Podcast hosts dedicate entire episodes to reconstructing the alleged timeline. Social media creators turn fragments of information into structured narratives with titles that sound like documentary episodes rather than gossip. What used to be casual commentary becomes serialized storytelling. Industry voices, meanwhile, respond more carefully, but still respond. Reality TV insiders begin discussing what this means for the franchise itself. The Real Housewives of Potomac has always thrived on conflict, but this kind of attention introduces a different pressure. It's no longer just about interpersonal drama on screen. It's about off-screen narratives bleeding into the production ecosystem. Some producers and commentators quietly acknowledge that when a cast member's personal life becomes the dominant conversation outside the show, it changes how every scene is perceived. Confessionals are no longer just entertainment. They are retroactively analyzed for truth value. Every episode becomes a potential source of evidence in the public imagination. That changes how the industry operates around the person at the center. Brand partners and media collaborators also begin adjusting tone. Nothing officially disappears, but messaging becomes more cautious. Appearances are framed more generally. Public engagements lean toward professionalism rather than personal narrative. In entertainment, perception risk is often managed quietly before any formal statement is ever made, and that silence itself becomes part of the story. Because audiences notice when things go quiet. Meanwhile, Wendy's supporters become increasingly vocal about media fairness. They argue that public figures, especially women in reality TV, are often subjected to narrative escalation that outpaces facts. They highlight how quickly speculation turns into assumption, and assumption turns into accepted truth without verification. This group frames the entire situation as a familiar pattern. A successful woman under scrutiny, with private life details amplified until they overshadow her professional identity. But even within supportive spaces, uncertainty lingers. The volume of discussion is so high that even defenders find themselves responding not just to critics, but to the sheer scale of interpretation happening online. Then comes the reaction that shifts the tone again: cast and franchise-adjacent commentary. Within reality TV circles, conversations begin circulating about how the situation affects on-screen dynamics. Castmates who have shared scenes with Wendy are now being asked about events that exist largely outside the show's direct narrative. Interviews become more carefully worded. Statements are neutral, measured, and often intentionally vague. No one wants to validate speculation, but no one wants to dismiss audience curiosity either. That balancing act creates a strange tension where even silence from peers is interpreted in multiple ways. Some see it as professionalism. Others see it as avoidance. Outside the franchise, broader entertainment media starts framing the situation as part of a larger trend: the collapse of separation between reality TV and real-world consequence. Analysts point out that in earlier eras of television, viewer speculation stayed within fan communities. Now, with social media amplification, narratives travel across platforms instantly, gaining momentum before official clarification can even exist. Wendy Osefo becomes a case study in that shift. Not because of confirmed outcomes, but because of how quickly interpretation became global. Even international commentary picks up fragments of the story, reframing it through the lens of celebrity culture, public accountability, and media pressure. The details vary depending on platform, but the core idea remains consistent. A public figure caught in a rapidly evolving narrative ecosystem where control over personal story becomes increasingly difficult. At the same time, engagement metrics around her name surge across platforms. Search trends spike. Old clips resurface again and again in recommendation loops. Algorithms reinforce attention by feeding users related content, creating a feedback cycle where curiosity generates visibility, and visibility generates more curiosity. In this environment, even neutral content becomes loaded. A simple interview clip can be presented as "before everything changed." A harmless quote can be reframed as "now under scrutiny." The algorithm doesn't distinguish between confirmation and speculation, it only tracks attention. And that accelerates everything. By this point, public reaction is no longer just reaction, it is infrastructure. It sustains the narrative, expands it, and keeps it alive even in the absence of new verified developments. Industry insiders quietly acknowledge a familiar truth. Once a story reaches this level of saturation, it no longer needs new information to continue. It sustains itself through reinterpretation. And that is exactly what is happening here. Wendy Osefo is no longer just a participant in a reality show storyline. She has become a shared reference point in a much larger conversation about image, truth, and how quickly public narratives can evolve without formal resolution. And as public and industry reactions continue to build, one question begins to rise above everything else. What happens when the story stops needing facts and starts surviving purely on belief? By the time the final twist begins to surface, the situation has already moved past entertainment, past speculation, and even past the usual reality TV cycle of controversy and resolution. What remains is something more unstable, a narrative that keeps reshaping itself every time new fragments are added to it. And then, just when it seems like the story has reached its loudest point, something unexpected happens. Not a confirmation, not a denial. Something quieter than that. A shift in positioning. It begins with small signals, subtle changes in public appearance, slight adjustments in tone during interviews, a noticeable distance in how Wendy Osefo refers to her personal life. Where there was once a unified narrative, there is now carefully separated language. My work, my family, my situation, phrasing that feels deliberate, structured, almost legally aware. And audiences notice immediately, because in stories like this, silence is never empty. It is interpreted. Then comes the moment that changes everything again. Wendy appears at a public engagement without Eddie in a setting where the expectation of unity was previously assumed. Nothing dramatic happens on stage, no announcement is made, no confrontation unfolds, but the absence is loud. It is the kind of absence that doesn't need explanation to be felt. Social media fills the gap instantly. Within hours, theories evolve from possible tension to active separation. The idea of divorce, once speculative, now becomes the dominant interpretation. Not because it has been confirmed, but because it is the only explanation that fits the newly observed behavior patterns being circulated online. And that is when the second layer of the twist begins. A series of older clips resurface, interviews, confessionals, and promotional appearances where Wendy and Eddie discuss their partnership, financial structure, and shared responsibilities. But this time, they are being watched differently. Not as memories, but as contradictions waiting to be identified. One particular clip gains traction, a discussion about decision-making authority within the household. At the time, it sounded like a standard explanation of teamwork and trust. Now it is being dissected for implications about control, accountability, and who is actually responsible for what behind the scenes. Another clip shows Wendy confidently addressing criticism and speculation in earlier seasons, emphasizing stability and unity. That clip is now being juxtaposed with current silence, creating a visual contrast that fans interpret as before and after. And suddenly, the narrative feels like it has split into two timelines. Then comes the most disruptive development yet. A wave of online claims begins circulating, suggesting that internal documentation disputes and financial inconsistencies may be under closer review than previously understood. Again, nothing officially verified in the public space, but the language used online shifts dramatically. It is no longer framed as rumor. It is framed as ongoing development, unfolding situation, and active scrutiny. That change in language is what pushes the story into its final phase. Because now audiences are no longer waiting for drama. They are waiting for resolution. But resolution doesn't arrive. Instead, another shift. Reports begin circulating that Wendy may be repositioning her public narrative entirely, focusing more heavily on professional identity, academic work, and independent branding. Her appearances become more controlled, less personal, more segmented. The emotional language that once defined reality TV confessionals begins to disappear, replaced by carefully constructed professionalism. To some viewers, this looks like damage control. To others, it looks like reinvention. But to everyone, it looks intentional. And that is where the cliffhanger forms. Because while public attention is focused on whether Wendy and Eddie are separating, another question begins to emerge underneath it. What exactly is being separated? Emotionally, financially, or structurally? No one can agree. Then, in the final beat of this unfolding narrative, something even more intriguing happens. Eddie Osefo's presence in the public storyline becomes almost entirely absent. Not through confirmation, not through statement, but through disappearance from the conversational center. Interviews no longer reference him directly. Discussions about Wendy's future no longer assume partnership as a default condition. It is as if the story is quietly rewriting its own foundation. And that is the most unsettling part. Because nothing has been officially closed. No statement has definitively ended anything. No document has confirmed the direction of the situation. Yet, the public narrative behaves as if a conclusion has already been reached. That gap between official silence and public certainty becomes the emotional core of the cliffhanger. Wendy Osefo stands at the center of a story that is no longer being told by one source, but by thousands of interpretations simultaneously. Each one slightly different, each one confident, each one incomplete. And as the noise builds, one final question lingers without resolution. If everyone is watching the same story, how did they all end up with different endings? And that's where this story leaves us for now. Because what started as a simple reality TV conversation has turned into something far more layered. A mix of perception, interpretation, speculation, and shifting narratives that continues to evolve with every clip resurfaced and every new comment added online. Whether you see this as exaggerated internet storytelling or a real unfolding personal crisis, one thing is clear: the public is fully locked in. Wendy Osefo has spent years building a reputation around intelligence, control, and composure under pressure. But in situations like this, even the most carefully managed public image gets tested when audiences start rewriting the story in real time. And once that process begins, it rarely slows down on its own. The most interesting part isn't even the controversy itself. It's how divided the reactions are. Some people are convinced this is nothing more than online speculation spiraling out of control. Others believe there are deeper layers still waiting to be revealed. And both sides are watching every development closely, looking for something definitive to confirm what they already believe. But until anything is officially clarified, the story exists in that in-between space. Not fully confirmed, not fully denied, just constantly evolving. And that's why this conversation isn't ending here. Because every new appearance, every interview clip, every social media post adds another piece to a puzzle that the internet refuses to stop assembling. Whether the final picture will match what people expect or completely surprise, everyone is still unknown. What is known, however, is that audiences aren't stepping away from it. If anything, attention is increasing, clips are being shared faster, discussions are getting more detailed, and theories are becoming more structured than ever before. So the question now isn't just what's true, it's what people will choose to believe when the dust finally settles. And maybe more importantly, what will change once the full picture finally comes into focus. Until then, the story stays open. And all that's left to do is keep watching closely, because in situations like this, the next update always arrives when you least expect it.